Multi-platform games just aren't what they used to be. A game today will release on the PC, Xbox, PlayStation, and Switch, and the only real difference will be a slight change in the quality of the graphics. You see, back in the day, games would release on the PS3 and the 360, and then a completely different game with the same title would release on the Wii, and then a completely different game with the same title would release on the PS2, and then a completely different game with the same title would release on the DS. I think you see what I'm trying to say here. Now, a lot of games are guilty of this. I'm looking at you, Sonic Unleashed. But I think there's no better example than Star Wars The Force Unleashed. The Force Unleashed released back in 2008 on the PS3, Xbox 360, Wii, PC, Mac, PS2, PSP, Nintendo DS, iOS, J2ME, and N-Gage. You see what I mean? While I haven't played every version of The Force Unleashed, I've played all the major ones, the home console versions and the handhelds. These games are so different for some reason. The PS3, 360, and PC version of the game is the version most people probably think of when they think of The Force Unleashed. It was meant to show just what a Star Wars game could be on these then next-gen platforms. Force powers that could destroy the environment, ragdoll physics, and pretty good for the time graphics, along with some decent DLC support, showed that LucasArts meant business with this version of the title. The game was received well for the most part. While the hack-and-slash gameplay was boring to some, most people praised the game for its excellent job at capturing the feeling of Star Wars and its story. This was only 3 years after the prequel, so the idea of exploring the time between Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope was new, as well as the idea of Vader having an apprentice. It was all very exciting, and a really good hook to get people in. But the PS3 and the 360 weren't the only consoles of the 7th generation. Oh no. The Wii version of The Force Unleashed. It's great, as long as you want to play a completely different game. And no, I'm not talking about having to shake my arms around to attack and use the Force. I feel just like Luke Skywalker. While the larger story of the game is the same, the level design is completely different. Levels have also been added to this version, or rather cut from the next-gen version. See, there's this bit in the Wii version where in between certain levels you'll get sent to the Jedi Temple. This wasn't present in the PS3, 360, and PC versions of the game until it was added back as DLC, but even still the DLC was completely different from what you do in the Wii version, so I'm lost. It makes it hard to tell what the definitive version of this game's story really is. Unless you're a nerd and like to read books or something. Lightsaber customization is still there, as is the different costumes, but you also go to a sort of hub on the Rogue Shadow in between missions, which isn't the worst thing. It's just strange. Now, if you've played The Force Unleashed, you know it loves its QuickTime events. Killed a mini-boss? QuickTime event. Killed an actual boss? QuickTime event. Need to file your taxes? QuickTime event. So obviously the QuickTime events had to make it to the Wii version. So how do you think they did it? Yeah, I bet you were wrong. The Wii version also has a training mode to teach you how to move your arms like a true Sith, and a versus mode, where you and a friend can pick from a variety of different Star Wars characters that all have the same moveset as Starkiller in the story mode, and fight. I don't have any friends, so, enjoy this footage of me bullying a motionless Darth Vader. Now, even though the game was different, it's still not bad. In fact, there's a lot of people who prefer the Wii version. But what if you're like me, and would love to play the Wii version, but with normal controls? Well, boy, do I have the console for you! The PS2 version of The Force Unleashed. If you thought it was weird that the PS2 was still getting games in 2008, just wait until I introduce you to FIFA. Now, the PS2 version is the same as the Wii version, just with the motion controls removed. That's not the only thing removed, however, because every bit of extra content the Wii version received was also removed. This version has the story mode and the story mode only. This version of the game easily has the least amount of features, and we haven't even gotten to the DS version yet. Oh god, the DS version of this game! It's an abomination! Every action except for movement is a button you tap on the touchscreen. This is an affront to God. I understand having weird touchscreen-based mini-games to justify it as a DS title, which it does do, by the way. But this? It would be fine if I could choose a normal control scheme in the options. I know there's enough buttons on the original DS for it. But instead, the only function that the face buttons have is to be a D-pad, but shittier. The Rogue Shadow hub makes a return here, but now you get to actually walk around it, which is cool, I guess? Lightsaber colors, costumes, all still here in their now heavily pixelated glory. The gameplay itself is fine? I'm not expecting to be blown away by a handheld port of a console game, but I feel like it could have been better? Maybe I'm just spoiled by all the other versions I played today, but it just feels like it's lacking that feeling that makes it The Force Unleashed. The DS version does have multiplayer though. Something that the PS2 version doesn't have. Yes, I'm still fucking mad about it. They couldn't have given it a tiny little multiplayer mode, a little dual mode, something to make it more of a game than the DS version? And that brings us to the last major release of the game I'm gonna be talking about today. The PSP. And wow, is this a surprisingly good game. It's a straight port of the PS2 version of the game, with the same combat levels and everything. It doesn't even look that bad? Like, graphically, this is pretty impressive for the PSP. It really puts the DS version to shame. What is it with Sony and making handhelds that are ahead of their time and extremely underrated? The surprising thing about this is, this version of The Force Unleashed easily has the most features out of all of them. Hell, I'd call it the definitive version of The Force Unleashed. It has the story, sure, but it also has an Order 66 wave-based mode, a historical missions mode where you can play through moments from the movies, and a dueling mode as well. Where was all of this on the PS2? The Order 66 mode is pretty fun. You kill waves of stormtroopers, not clones for some reason, until you hit a boss fight, and then the arena changes. This goes on for 22 waves, which I only know because I googled it. Unrelated to that fun tidbit of information, this mode gets unbelievably difficult. You get 2 respawns, but that just wasn't enough for me. Next up is the historic missions. You've got moments from most of the movies here, including Revenge of the Sith and Return of the Jedi. They're fun little missions, and of course you get to see these classic fights with a little bit of that Force Unleashed edge to them. The Force Duels mode is the least interesting of the bunch, as it just puts you up against random characters in a duel. You beat them, move on to the next person. Fun enough to do 1 or 2, but nothing to write home about. Oh, and guess what? It's got multiplayer! Did somebody inform LucasArts you could plug more than 1 controller into a PS2, or did they just forget? Now sure, there's a few more versions of The Force Unleashed out there, but until I can get my hands on an N-Gauge, I'm gonna consider this a comprehensive enough overview. Maybe I'll even give Sonic Unleashed on PS2 a chance after all this time.
I'm Sonic the Hedgehog. And you are?
Oh god, never mind.